Hey guys, Claudia here. Welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Today we are going to be talking about tomatoes, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Tomatoes are probably it vegetable for the summertime. I think it's arguably probably everybody's favorite vegetable, especially to grow. It's one of those that it tastes so much better homegrown versus buying anything at any grocery store. So I'm excited to show you some of my tips and tricks for tomato care. We've talked about tomatoes before on our channel, but I was out in the garden last night harvesting and I thought, let's talk about proper watering, fertilizing, pest and disease control. So let's just get right into it. Watering is probably one of the key things that's going to determine the success of your tomato plants. It's important with anything that we do in the garden. Proper watering and consistent watering on a consistent schedule is going to be the number one thing that you can do for the success of your plants. Tomato plants love a deep watering, which means you should be watering your plants 2 to 3 times a week for a long period of time instead of watering them every day. Deep watering not only promotes stronger and better roots, but it also helps prevent things like your tomatoes from splitting, which can often happen if your tomatoes go for a long period of time without watering and all of a sudden you give it an influx of water, and what happens is those fruits start to split, almost like stretch marks. When we get bigger, your skin starts to stretch. Same thing like with tomatoes. So if you go a long period of time without watering and all of a sudden you introduce a ton of water to it, well, those plants or those fruits are going to start to split. So oftentimes that's what causes the splitting of tomatoes. The way we ensure consistent watering is by using a drip irrigation system. All of our garden is on drip, which makes our life so much easier. However, if you don't have drip set up in your yard, it's okay. You can use soaker hose, which really do a really great job of even watering. You could also use a bucket. So drill a couple of holes in a bucket and then set it by your tomato plant and it will kind of be like a slow release. That has helped me a lot, especially with watering trees. You can also gently release water by gently opening your hose nozzle just a little bit so you have that slow trickle, and that will also mimic a drip irrigation. Finally, you can just hand water either with a watering can or with a hose. If you are doing that, make sure you're watering a little bit, walking away, coming back to the plant, watering it a little bit more. When we didn't have drip irrigation, I would walk around our beds and I would just gently water, walk to the next plant, water, and make like 3 trips around to ensure that I really got that deep water that tomatoes love so much. One quick little tip is when you're watering, try not to get the leaves of your plants wet. If you accidentally do, it's not the end of the world. It's not as detrimental as a lot of us like to think it is, but in general, try not to get too much water up on your plants just because that can cause disease, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Next up is fertilizing. When we planted our plants, which we started from seed, we always give them a boost of energy to get going. We use compost and we also like to use tomato tone or a good starter fertilizer, again, just to ensure that those roots are getting nutrients to them and they're helping them grow right along. Once our tomatoes start flowering and fruiting, that's when I know to start fertilizing them. So I've been on a consistent schedule all season long where I fertilize our plants every 2 to 4 weeks. One of the biggest mistakes you can avoid is using a fertilizer that contains a lot of nitrogen. That is going to promote a lot of leafy growth. You can use it in the beginning to really get your plants up and going, but you want to back off a fertilizer that has too high of a nitrogen because, again, you want to focus on fruit production, not so much leafy growth. So there's a few different fertilizers I like to use. The one I've been reaching for the most lately is going to be the Tomato Tone by Espoma. Now, I do like to use the granular and the liquid depending on how much time I have. If I'm using the granular one, I take a handful and I sprinkle it around the base of each plant and I just work it into the soil and then I water it in by hand. That way I'm ensuring that it's really being worked into the soil versus relying on the drip to do that. Versus the liquid fertilizer, this one is great because it's really easy to use. You just mix it in a watering can and you water your plants in. If you don't have a lot of time, I would say this is probably faster. This takes, I don't know, this is just a lot quicker to use, but I do also like the granular one. So if I have extra time, I will, every 2 to 4 weeks, I'll do a little bit of the granular and then either alternate with the liquid or just stick with one or the other. It really doesn't matter. The great thing about this fertilizer is that it has low nitrogen. The liquid one has about 1%. I think the granular has 3%, if I'm not mistaken. And it also has phosphorus, it has calcium, it has sulfur. So it has a lot of the ingredients and elements that your plants need to thrive and stay healthy all season long. So it's kind of a one-stop shop, which again just makes it a little bit easier for me. Again, I've used other fish fertilizers, ones with bag guano. Lately I've been really loving this stuff, and it's just, you know, it works really well for our plants, and they're thriving and producing so much fruit this year. It's been delicious. Whatever fertilizer you use, just make sure you stay on a consistent schedule. Again, choose something with low nitrogen after your plants are established, and try to really stay on top of, if you're doing it every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks or every 3 weeks, stay on top of that, because your plants are also kind of relying on it. If you're growing tomatoes in containers, it's especially important for you to fertilize, just because when you're watering, you're washing away a lot of those nutrients. So it's important to supplement with fertilizer, because they're not getting that extra yummy stuff that they would get from the soil when they're planted in the ground. So again, if you grow in containers, love to do that. I've done that many times, but I always make sure I stay on top of fertilizing if that's the case. Consistent watering and fertilizing brings me up to my next topic, which is disease. One of the most common diseases you're going to find in tomatoes, especially this time of year, is going to be blossom end rot. And that's when your tomato fruit actually has that brown spot on the bottom of it. Blossom end rot is caused by an inability of your tomato plant to uptake calcium. Now, it doesn't mean that your soil doesn't have calcium. It just means that there's probably inconsistent watering, and it's not uptaking those nutrients. In fact, it's probably not uptaking a lot of the nutrients it needs to fully thrive and grow. That's why staying on top of your watering is really important. Now, say you are watering consistently, you're staying on top of it, but there's still something wrong and you're having plants with blossom end rot. You can either use the tomato tone, which has calcium in it, or you can also use garden lime. This is the one that I've used in the past to amend the soil. This has calcium in it. It's very rare that we have issues with blossom end rot, because we stay on top of either our fertilizing or we do amend our soil with calcium. But the biggest thing is we stay on top of our watering. That is the one thing, if we're going to skip anything in the garden, watering and like staying on top of our watering schedule is the one thing we never slip on. The other two common diseases that you might see in your tomato plants is blight and rust. That's usually caused by water on your tomato leaves. It picks up a bacteria in the soil and it splashes on your leaves and it could damage them. You can remedy that by trying not to get water on your leaves. You can remove the lower leaves, which we do with all of our plants to create more airflow. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And you can remedy that with neem oil. Now let's talk about pests in your tomato plant. We typically don't have any issues with pests. The most common ones you might see are going to be tomato hornworm, which look scary, and also aphids. Tomato hornworms, you can usually just pick those off of your plants and get rid of them. Aphids, you can always spray Rosar X. It's a product I always talk about that I love. To avoid some of these pests, what I like to do is companion plant. There are so many plants that you can plant with your tomatoes to ensure not only the overall health of your tomato plants, but also to repel pests. I'm a flower girl through and through, so I love to plant flowers anywhere I can, especially with my tomatoes. Calendula is a really beautiful flower that you can grow with your tomatoes. It emits a fragrance that will repel hornworms. You can also use French marigolds, which is what I have right now in our tomato bed. Not only do French marigolds repel root knot nematodes in your soil, but they also help repel hornworms and aphids. Nasturtiums are another flower I love to grow with our tomatoes. They're edible and they act as a trap crop for aphids and white flies. As far as herbs goes, there's so many that you can grow with your tomato plants. Basil and tomatoes go really well together. They're like the peanut butter and jelly of the garden. You can also grow parsley. There's just so many herbs you can choose from. All right, if you're going to companion plant with your tomatoes, it's important that there's a lot of airflow in your tomato plants. You can see that we remove probably about a foot or two of the bottom leaves. This helps with airflow. It also helps with pest and disease. And remember, these bottom leaves, they tend to die off first, especially when you see them browning. Just go ahead and cut them off. They're not serving you any purpose, and they could cause they could start causing disease. So remove them from your tomato plants. You can see we have the French marigolds here. We also popped in some sunflowers just for fun. This was Sergey's idea, so we have sunflowers growing in here. But again, we still have a lot of room that we can plant either some herbs or some other flowers. You can direct seed some crops right now. So it's a great way to utilize space. Again, companion planting will help with pests and disease with your tomato plants. So it's just an overall great practice to start implementing into your garden. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the overall look of our tomato plants. We grow a lot of indeterminate tomatoes, so when you're thinking about pruning, make sure you know what variety or what category of tomatoes that you're growing. Most of ours are indeterminate, which means they'll just continue growing and growing and growing. We like to use tomato cages. It's just something that we've always had success with, and I think, you know, I like the way it looks in the garden, especially with our flowers. We also use these posts for our cherry tomatoes, which we Velcro when they get bigger. So as they continue to grow, we come in with a little bit of Velcro, which is really nice because you can reuse these, and we just Velcro the vines to the stake. Everything else, again, we just use the tomato cages. We like to keep our tomatoes pruned up. We like to remove the suckers all season long just to maintain an overall nice shape of our plants and really just focus on fruit production and not get a bushy plant. Again, it's just an aesthetic thing for us. A lot of people will just let their tomatoes grow wild, and that's fine too. You can totally do that. However, we just like the way that these plants look all tidied up like this. All right, well, those are my tips and tricks to keeping your tomatoes looking beautiful all season long, all the while producing beautiful, juicy tomatoes for you all summer long. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments section. Thank you again for hanging out with me in the garden today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Perfect every time.